So my name is Tanveer Ahmed, and I'm a senior lecturer in fashion with a focus on race here at Central St Martin's, and giving you a really massive warm welcome to day 2 of the Fashion Race Summit. So we kicked off yesterday with a film by Ricardo Barker called Voicing Our Truths, and also a panel discussion from the FACE co-founders, really setting the scene for what this conference is about. This conference is about discussing issues of inequality in education and inequality specifically in fashion design education. And it's also about us coming together as a community, many of us meeting for the first time, we've only met each other online, and coming together to kind of build real collective energy and spirit about what we can do to build a much more ethical, sustainable, and a much more conscious fashion design industry and a fashion design education. We've been planning this for a long time. So our program director, Hal Davis, has been with Karen Franklin, one of the co-founders of FACE, have been thinking about what can we do. We want to have action. We don't want to just have people talking on their own quietly in corridors feeling isolated. And so we're so pleased to welcome so many of you here today. It's really exciting to see so many of you wanting to join this conversation and wanting to think about what we can do. As Isabella said, there's lots of different panels today. We have crammed in an awful lot of different things going on. So please obviously do feel free to take breaks. But without further ado, I want to introduce our first keynote of the day. So I'm hugely honoured and excited to be introducing you to Asiya Durrani-McCann, who's a luxury brand builder and lecturer at the University of Southampton and curator of At 90s from the 90s, and Osman Yousefzada, who's an interdisciplinary artist and writer, and they'll be in conversation. Osman's practice revolves around modes of storytelling, merging autobiography with fiction and ritual. He launched his eponymous label in 2005 and expanded his practice into a visual art space in 2013. Osman's work is concerned with the representation, rupture and reimagining of the migrational experience and makes reference to the socio-political issues of today. These themes are explored through moving image, installation, writing, sculpture, garment making and performance. Osman is a visiting fellow at Jesus College, Cambridge University, and a research practitioner across the spatial architecture and sculpture at the Royal College of Art. Osman is also came to Central St Martin's, and maybe you might talk a little bit about that as well. So we're really pleased to welcome you here, both of you today. Thank you.
That's you in lights. You're really in lights. Osman, such an honour to be sat next to you here. Been a long time. You've described yourself recently, well, for a while now, with interdisciplinary directions, not only as a designer, a maker, you like to say, an artist, a writer, and an activist. You're rolled into one. And you've shown at various international institutions, and currently recently you've just completed, I think a couple of days ago, your solo interventions titled What is Seen and What is Not at the V&A. The momentum for much of your work comes from consequences of immigration. As a second generation immigrant, the British multidisciplinary artist, please can you open up the room to how your identity comes through in your work?
I think for a long time I kind of really hid my identity, and I really wanted to kind of fit into a space, and that was like kind of quite it was quite tough. I think there wasn't a space for actually storytelling, and I'm really so glad that it's actually opened up so much easier now that stories can actually be told. But the conversations that I had, so I was living in this kind of dual world of carving a career in the fashion industry, and then actually trying to live also in Birmingham. And I knew with my parents, who come from quite a, I mean, I've always kind of, I don't really know how to describe it. It's like an Amish community, like a Muslim, very closed migrant community, which is not, it's more like an underclass. It's not even working class. So it's this very closed off world that that has its own histories. So, I mean, for me, I've kind of slowly progressed out of fashion. And because I really didn't want to have like commodity conversations. I didn't really want to have these conversations where, how do I marry purpose with commerce? And, I had like crazy ass stories of like kind of crazy investors and doing certain things. And I think the whole industry is always kind of very much, it attracts, it's very aspirational. I mean, it's very much I'm cooler than you kind of conversation. We belong in an elitist kind of club. And it's this club that we try and, again, commoditize and actually try and sell out to other people. And I think those are the, I think it's great. I mean, I suppose it's a business fundamentally at the end of the day. And when you kind of like marry so much purpose around it, it doesn't always work. I mean, there's always casualties.
Yeah. And then you just described your background. So you produced work as a designer in this environment that you describe as a commodity base. And then you have this background that you keep coming home to. So does that now resonate in the work that you bring out? These kind of two different worlds that you've sat in for some time.
I mean, for me, it's just this idea of where do I belong in a way. So it's this eternal kind of quest. And I don't think I'll probably actually find it in my lifetime to some extent, because there's so many dualities and so many spaces that I really occupy. And that's, and I think it's those intersections. I mean, really I was talking about the other day, I think my work is based on the idea that the biblical term that the meek will inherit the earth. And it's those kind of like, it's those analogies that the marginalized, the othered, at those intersections, which are the kind of portals to other worlds and sort of like new amazingness and kind of new ideas of kind of belonging. And that's the kind of little space that I really want to try and occupy.
Yeah, and you're merging more and more into that now. When I first met you, it was about 2005. And no, just to say, sorry, you were merging.
I was 12.
Yeah, you were 12. And I've been working in. Well, I'm going to say it, but I've been working in luxury since the 90s. And you were probably the first brown person that I'd come across, and that was 2005, from the early 90s. It was a long time that I hadn't come across anybody, And the other thing was, you came from an Afghan Pakistani background, which just attracted to you immediately, because I also come from a similar background. And so I wanted to revolve around you. I wanted you to succeed as well, massively. I remember going to see you at you did a presentation on the Rue Saint-Honoré. You had a showroom, and I popped in, and it was like one of your first ones.
London showroom.
Yeah, no, it wasn't a London showroom. You did one on your own, I think, at one point on the Rue Saint-Honoré. And it's just a little space that you took. And I always wanted to support you, because I wanted you to succeed, because I resonated with you. But and then you went on. You went on 2 years later to get the design awards. You stocked in 25 stockists, including Selfridges, Liberties, Harvey Nichols, Podium, which was quite big in Russia at the time. And you had this couture, sublime look to your presentations always. And even you say that you're a maker now when it comes to fashion. You say that you stepped away from it, but you have this consciousness in particular when it comes to fashion now.
I wouldn't describe myself as a fashion designer now.
No,
I call myself a garment maker, if I do actually make anything.
Right.
And it more is wearing towards kind of performance. So there's not really in the fashion systems of seasonality.
Right.
Fundamentally, I was in a system where you had a series of investors kind of coming in, and the fashion system is all about the idea of next season, and it kind of killed me, basically. It's not really a very healthy industry, I mean, you've got to, and then there's a lot of emphasis on the idea of you've got to be bigger and better. And we have we have some of the best schools in the country, but we don't have no industry. We have no making industry. We have no kind of like proper business kind of tie up. So you have this sort of massive gap. It's just like it becomes the emperor's new clothes, basically, where you kind of parade so much out, and you're kind of like, it's the Warholian idea of 15 minutes of fame, and you have
so
this
much
kind of
energy
moment.
going into it.
Yeah, so you have this kind of like time, and then and it's like who's behind me, kind of thing, and there's this conveyor belt of actually. And I think that's really somehow how the British fashion industry is actually really kind of set up in a way. And so I and then I kind of go into from the backgrounds that I kind of come and, I was making kind of posh clothes for posh people, basically. And my kind of, and I'm not really posh. I kind of dumbed down my Brummie accent, but it's like, and code switched off, but it's not really, I always felt when I was going in there's these big fancy houses which actually have this kind of like majesty of awe, and then this imposing kind of, hall or lobby, and you go in there and you're kind of like, you're put in your place somehow. You're like a craftsman and a service person that actually goes into this space. I'm sure, this is not everyone, but there's these, it's just like, kind of, I don't know. It made me feel like that. Maybe it's a continuous imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Do you think that, again, that resonates with your upbringing, which we go to this next slide a second, which is really important. This is your book. It came out earlier this year, The Go-Between. There's so much. I read it, and there's moments where I cried and laughed in appropriate moments because I resonate with your voice in it so much. Tell us, why did you decide to do this?
I think they're really hidden stories, basically, of a period of time in the 80s, growing up. And they're kind of stories that actually that no one really knows. I think there's always these kind of, okay, both my parents are illiterate. They can't read or write. They don't speak any English. They don't actually read or write in their mother tongue. So there's real kind of like massive canyon of the world that I kind of come from and the world I kind of came into, basically. So it's this kind of world, and the women were actually really, so my sisters were taken out of school at the age of 10, 11 in Birmingham, and they weren't allowed to go to secondary school. So they were I come from this Pathan kind of community. I don't know if someone who actually comes from Pakistan kind of knows the area. It's the border region of Afghanistan and Pakistan, basically, where like my parents come from. They were born 20 miles away from where Malala was actually shot. So there's a kind of real, and then when they came here, they came as, my dad came in the 60s, my mom came in the 70s, and then we were born here. So it's this idea that, and then the 80s happened, basically, and then you had this sort of like, you kind of had the deindustrialization of the North, which is like Thatcherite, sort of closing down all the factories, closing down. So my dad came, he doesn't speak any English. So the kind of work that he was doing was actually heavy labor in the foundries, that work that no one really wanted to do. And there's a whole kind of community in the textile industries. You go up there and they're kind of very ghetto areas now. And they're kind of communities that haven't really integrated. So when the 80s happened, all these guys, the factories shut down shop, and you created a vacuum. You created a vacuum which was filled by religion. And, you had this sort of religiosity, dress change actually kind of happening, many things. And I think that the book really charters this idea of a hidden world. We all know what happened in the miners' strike, if you guys are from the UK, but then these are actually the minority communities that had similar experiences, but they're not really having those stories aren't really documented. So for me, it was really this way of actually documenting history for that particular time.
Well, you're definitely the first, I'd say, a book I've picked up that resonates with the British migration communities in that specifically in Birmingham as well. I know I grew up in Bradford, and we have similar communities, but nothing quite resonated with me like the Pathan community that you came from as well. And that's where it's heartstrings. You plucked at all those heartstrings. And I mean, if anybody has a moment, please, you must pick up the book. You get to so many layers of the community and yourself that we go through. And you talk about Birmingham a lot, and this image is important because there's Muhammad Ali sitting in the mosque at Birmingham. And Birmingham still resonates through your work as well. You've done. Could you talk about some of your art and work that you go through? You keep going back to Birmingham, yeah?
I don't know. It seems like kind of big in Japan. Kind of like. Well, I'm from Birmingham, and I think you get. I don't know. I haven't got the keys to Birmingham yet, but maybe like. It's this. It is actually the second largest city, and no matter what anyone says about Manchester or anyone else, guys, I'm sorry. Birmingham is actually the second city of UK. So I had an opportunity to. So I've been sort of delving in and out, doing these zines since like 2013. Really kind of understand of like. So when I started doing fashion, everyone was like. I mean, I had these couple of patrons who'd be like, "Oh God, this is amazing! This is amazing tailoring, Osman. Just focus on your tailoring, and we'll put you in a nice box, and that's kind of great, basically. But don't really talk about your heritage. Don't talk about anything in the sense of like any of, there's this kind of I don't know. So I had this kind of really rustle of how to have a continuous voice in a way. So I was sort of meddling around with actually how I was going to do that. So I started these zines, which were called The Collective, and The Collective started it started off with these kind of posh ladies, which are kind of like art patrons, and then that kind of merged into kind of more, it became much more fluid, and it got like amazing people like Hans Ulrich kind of interested in it, and then it became kind of I haven't done one for about a few years, and the pandemic happened. But there are like sort of these art kind of fashion and kind of writing kind of zines, and I was really lucky. American Express sponsored it all for about 4 years, and it became like a lookbook, but it also became these kind of like spaces for stories to be told. And I was still trying to grapple of like how I was going to make money in actually fashion, and the fashion part was actually you just focus on tailoring, Osman. You just like do a great jacket, a great pair of pants, and that's it. So it'd be like some seasons I'll be like trying to do this sort of runway show, which was like, I've got to like please this person, and then I've got to please that person, and there was like this kind of really weird, and there was never enough money to do anything basically. So it was this kind of and the way the system is actually really built, the wholesale system, is that you have to deliver each season, and if you don't, and there's the idea of not delivering, you lose kind of like your space because somebody else takes it. And then I mean before Barney's shut down, Barney's actually was really one of my best customers, where I had like a nice corner, and they'd only put some things actually on markdown, so they just carry stock off the following season, which was like amazing. So is this, I don't know what I'm gonna, where I'm going to wear, but so eventually I kind of moved more into the visual art space, and I still do. I did a show about a year and a half ago because someone paid me to do it, and for some reason I just want to have, for some reason, but to just live, I would like to have every project that I do has a start, a production time, a fee for me kind of carved out, and then basically an end to it, rather than it being like this continuous investment of cycles that you don't really know what's going to happen, and you're kind of so I'm just trying to sort of create a space for myself which has the same conversation but across different mediums, and I think allows me to make that conversation much stronger.
Well, I don't think you're the. Valentino recently said, it breaks his heart. He used to break it a couple of years ago, but he said it broke his heart. His whole atelier, everybody working for months like crazy on their collections that go into store, and they're discounted within less than 5 weeks.
Yeah.
And this what that made us all question, but you're right, you're correct. It shouldn't be this. I love this idea that Barney's did. Unfortunately, they don't exist anymore, but that's how it should be. You're adding all the time, and and it makes sense. We had, in bringing it back to We Are a Face and this summit, you did an incredible article in 2020 for Vogue magazine. You really took some, I think you were thought-provoking time for you. This is a quote that you'd made. And it was about really finally waking up to the real and ambiguous issue of racism, because it does exist. And I'd just like you to maybe express how you feel, whether things are improving or they have improved since George Floyd was murdered, and we have all started to communicate, and we got together at Face because of that moment. How do you feel? How do you think things are changing or not?
I think there was this very silent majority that was just kind of like taking their time in the room to the trend to kind of go away, basically. And I think a lot of the conversations are also about class as well, which doesn't always get talked about as much. There's the Priti Patels, there's the Rishi Sunaks, there's always going to be those people. There's Kemi, there's Kwasi, there's all of those people that are actually somehow the spectrum that actually don't want to tell your stories, basically. And they're seen as kind of like this neoliberalism, this idea that no matter where you come from, how hard you work, you're just kind of like the American dream is there for you for the taking, and it's going to be there, and you just need to be working damn hard. And it's going to happen. And if it didn't happen, then you didn't work hard enough, basically. And it's like...
You obviously didn't work hard enough.
I think I'm still working. I've got time. So I think my politics are very different.
Yeah.
But I think what it has done is actually, the optics have actually changed. I didn't know if actually access has completely changed, but the optics have actually really changed. And I think what it does, but the continued momentum is actually really what's kind of needed. But there's still, like, even if you bring in a sustainable conversation into this, like most of the, continuous greenwashing, there's still, if you look at some institutions, basically, there's still...
Greenwashing by companies owned by brown people. Let's talk about it. Boo-hoo,
No, most definitely. I think that's the other thing, when we actually have our histories, you look at the subcontinent, and we look at, I don't know if that's your next question, but I'm going to merge them all together.
Yeah, do whatever you like.
But it's this kind of like, there's these colonial kind of like partners that will still marry up. There was still like people, oh my God, why are you leaving?
Oh my God.
What's happened? Did I bore everyone?
No.
They've
got to have to actually study somewhere. What the heck?
Okay. So
they are business neutral.
Please, I'll pay you. Stay.
I ain't got the money.
Okay, great.
All right. What was that? Distraction.
Let me get back on my.
We were going.
But I think if you look at, the only reason why colonialism was actually really possible and the slave trade was possible, but was also our people, who were actually also agents for colonialism and also for the slave trade. Basically, it was just. You had, if I look at the agents within South Asia that kind of allowed, partnered with basically colonial agents, those are they're the same people. And I think that becomes like, what can I get access? This opportunity of new kind of platforms, and I'm going to take access, and doesn't really matter about that guy next door, no matter whether he's from the same community as me or not. And I think I don't know whether that's innately problem. I don't know. It's something that we can't really change because we're human, because greed and this idea for us who actually survives better than someone else is actually inherent. But then, we're supposed to be human beings and better caring and more conscious.
Yeah.
So I think there's this kind of real issue of histories, but I think what we do need to do is actually those entangled histories need to be really addressed, and there had to be a continuous conversation for that to happen. Yeah, for us to have better futures together.
Yeah, I think you supported massively in that voice that you've sent out, and then the work that you're exhibiting, I don't think would never have been available 10 years ago at the V&A. So you have broken incredible molds. But one conversation you started with me a couple of weeks ago was the voice of brown person, and in fact the voice of the South Asian, because brown person, we do get grouped together a great deal, and you brought me some real good enlightenment. You talked about your recent exhibition and moment at the V&A was a celebration for the independence, wasn't it, of India and Pakistan? And I said to you, it's odd, isn't it, that I grew up always telling somebody that I was Afghani background, well, my father was Afghani, but my mother was Kashmiri. And I said, why do you think I did that? And you said it's because of the country was so new that our parents told us where we came from was Afghanistan, and it's understanding that we are very different people, and we talk about this. So would you like to express on that? Could you enlighten me about myself with that comment on the phone briefly the other day?
Let me just kind of I don't know if this is what number is that question on your question? Sorry to. I'm gonna actually. It doesn't answer your house. Oh God. So let me just I'm gonna combine your questions together. I mean, I think. What do I say? I didn't really want to get into these conversations of racial hierarchies of pain. And I think when that happens, we have problems, basically.
Yeah.
And I think that is also the idea that, I sometimes look kind of in nostalgia at this kind of idea of political blackness sometimes, of 70s kind of ideas where communities kind of got together and there wasn't that many rishis or pretties or
and you actually interviewed
quasis.
People who were older who were part of that, who were Asian, let's say.
Yeah, it was part of I did a piece for The Guardian, so it was these individuals who actually came together and really, those histories are phenomenal, basically, and they felt that they were, this was kind of the generation before me, and they felt there was unity and strength of them actually being together, basically, because they had a common cause. But then and some of these guys were actually quite middle class. They were intellectuals. They weren't really. And then, so you had this kind of idea of political blackness, and then the 90s kind of happened. And you still had the kind of the African and the Caribbean conversation, and then you had some Asian businessmen who didn't want to see themselves as being black anymore. And it's this kind of whole idea. And then you had this cool Britannia of this kind of somehow the good immigrants, Asians were actually bringing out sort of great culture and Tony Blair's kind of, and then we had 9/11, and then it just went flat on your face, basically. So it's this idea of how do we come together and how do we the idea is having more of an equitable society. That's really my main, the space that I really want to open up platforms for other people. And I think that's really kind of important, whether you do that through clothes making, whether you do that through visual arts conversation or writing. Yeah. So, that's what I try and do, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And looking at this picture, the basis of a lot of your work in arts, and this is at the V&A quite recently, is I'd love you to talk through this piece, because I do I love the story of this piece, and it's storytelling upon storytelling that you have layers of it. Please, can you go through maybe just this piece for us?
Okay. So
it's off your peg, but there.
So this was the garden at the V&A Majestic Garden. So this is a seating sculpture, and there's around it there was a boat, and also there's a series of like charpais, which are ubiquitous kind of beds, and they're beds that sort of normally the kind of like the working classes actually use in South Asia. But you know, when you become middle class, you have a settee, you have a cupboard, you have many different things, you have a study desk. So but before these beds were, you know, you slept on them, you ate on them. There was this communal kind of architecture and how you occupied kind of space. So and then these are kind of smaller versions of those their kind of stools. And I mean, doing a series of interventions actually at V&A was just kind of like crazy to some extent. Anyway, working with institutions is already sometimes because you've got a 150-year-old institution which has got so many processes, and then you have like overworked curators who have to fill out sort of 10 forms for anything to happen. So you kind of like have like, I mean, it's just, anyway, that's another conversation.
And you actually.
So these are all made in Pakistan. So and then these would actually be stacked up in the morning, and then they would disappear throughout the whole of the as people use them. So they kind of like they became this kind of egalitarian idea of space, and then they were put together each morning.
Okay. So, and then the boat was reflective of the migration as well.
Well, it was this kind of like the idea of colonial expansion as well as the climate kind of emergency, this sort of duality, and I painted it black, and it just sat underneath Queen Victoria. There's a whole kind of facade at the top, and that is like the colonies are mentioned, and that was the first.
Yes.
Basically a mural from the Great Exhibition. So it's these kind of histories, and then I did this whole series of banners, which were kind of like the kind of the idea of the history of chintz. So there's these banners which were kind of like on sort of hangman banners, which became quite dark, but hopefully quite light as well. Don't know what I'm doing.
No, I think there's just it's beautiful. There's layers to it. You storytell in your work, your art, and also in your writing so beautifully. And there's a last slide here, but after this we could open the room to questions, which I truly loved. And those were these pouches that you had, which you have.
Pouches.
Well, they're pouches.
Sounds very fashion and selling.
Actually, reminded me of Dick Whittington and the end of the stick pouch that he kept his belongings in. Yeah.
Okay. So this was actually a story to female migration. My mother she came from a very rural background, so she never hung up her clothes in a wardrobe, which is kind of she put bags and bags and bags of everything. Everything was knotted, put together, and it's the way she occupied space, basically. And I think for me, I mean, it's the obvious conversation is really this is about migration, but for me it was about female agency within sort of dominant masculine spaces, like within patriarchy, where she carved out her space that this is my locks and keys on this plastic bag,
you can get
my knots, and that you can't open this, basically. So it was these kind of
value that she had.
Well, it's carving out her space. Yeah. It's like when you have this house, I mean, you may, and you're not really allowed to always go out of the house, and you come from I don't know. I don't really want. It's sort of like quite patriarchal communities, basically, where your husband is seen as your god on earth to some extent, your majazi khuda.
Yeah.
So it's a way of actually just carving out your space. And then I'll show you. I've got some pictures of her bags, but then I casted these in.
It was the first slide. If we go back to the very first slide, is that the castings that you had done.
This I didn't do myself because I would be really, really. This was done in Barengo. This was done by Murano Glass Studio, which actually does all the stuff for Ai Weiwei, and I'm having a show with them next year. So but the ceramics I did myself, but this is really great.
But the other thing I loved about that story was also it was that she was ready to uproot again at any point with her little valued packet, her statements there. You know, that whole thing about you've emigrated as a woman, you've come to another country, but you really don't know the powers of patriarchy are going to move you on to something else. You might be taken somewhere else all of a sudden. So that really resonated with me, I think.
I mean, you're always kind of arriving and never unpacking. And it's this idea of you're kind of creating work for another life, a new life, basically. Yeah. That's some of my research, I call it the new life, basically. It's this idea of that you're always kind of, especially when you come from little and you come for a lot, and these conversations of consumerism, and you even if it's like a £20, £2 basically dish from Poundland, you still really will cherish that dish basically, and you will still actually put it away, and it has meaning and it has purpose.
It's yours as well.
Yeah, so it's this kind of idea of like, I kind of compare it a little bit to the Book of the Dead, where you kind of all your belongings. You're never, this life is still ephemeral, and you're still sort of preparing for this another migrant life, basically somewhere else, which is going to be much better.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Osman. I'd love to all have a chance now. We'll have to give you a chance to give a question. Anybody here got a question? Oh God, there's a lady. There's a lady. Go on, Avis, go for it. Oh, do you want this, Gavis? All right, cool.
Thank you so much, Osman. That was really, really good, and thanks, Asiya. The question that I wanted to ask was, you said you talk about makers, and that you don't see yourself as a designer, but more as a maker. And I think that, or maybe the question is, do you think because it's mainly black and brown people that do all the making, that this then reflects into education, that maybe the establishments do not see black and brown people as educators and just as practitioners?
I think you've answered your question in yourself. I don't think you need me. I think there's a whole, I don't know where to start really. It's like I think in the creative industries, you definitely, I'm doing some work with, I don't know. I was looking at, because I had a symposium, we're just talking particularly about educators, okay. I had a symposium at the V&A, and I was looking through the whole list of Royal College. Royal College basically, academics there, I couldn't really find one, very few sort of non-white faces. I don't know, I shouldn't really be saying this at all. But
Is it a
but this is being recorded. Yeah, and then I was doing another series of work at Birmingham. There's hardly anyone in the whole faculty which is a brown and black face. So I don't know whether it is actually that where our parents didn't actually push, well, my parents didn't at all. Our parents, parents didn't actually push us to our parents pushed us more towards safe careers.
Yes.
Careers basically that actually they didn't think that the sacrifices that they made and they came to this country, and they felt that you could become a doctor or a lawyer or a particular thing that you think that they'd done their job basically. They don't have to worry about their children.
Yeah, being a teacher didn't come into that, did it?
No, I think a teacher is actually a really good career basically. I think that's it. But it's just I think the trajectory to actually being an arts and a design teacher was actually a little bit different to actually just being a secondary school teacher. Because you'd still have to someone would have to still pay for that degree, and you'd have to, do basically an art and design degree before you went on and actually became. I mean, a lot of, through people I'm trying to find a safe space in academia, basically, because I just feel like I've got so much going. I have to go from continuous one job to another, like pays me £1,000 or £2,000 just to kind of live continuously. So I'm trying to find a couple of days in a way that will just kind of anchor me, that I can do other stuff, because I don't feel like I have to say yes to everything.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's just this continual thing of like, where's my next bit of rent going to come from?
Which is ridiculous.
So I think, you're definitely right. And I think the idea of practitioners is like, it's also, if you look at South Asia, I mean, in India, a lot of the embroideries for Chanel, Gucci, a lot of these actually come from South Asia.
Brand, yeah.
But somehow it's these kind of like brown hands that sell these kind of like these other, the dreams of kind of white faces sometimes, basically. And I think it's this, but I mean, I think these people aren't always seen as kind of craftspeople. If you're a cashmere maker in Scotland, then it's a different conversation, or you're an atelier at Lesage in Paris, then you can take a hallowed bow on a Chanel catwalk, basically, and you're put right center at the front. But I mean, I think you've answered your question. I don't know why.
Because you are in that position, Avis. I know Avis's work, and you resonate with that so much, don't you?
Yeah, but I mean, I think you always need other people to mirror it. Yeah,
and you have.
I think you need other people to mirror what you want to. Yeah. No, thank you.
Thank
Hello.
you. There's a question there. You can't miss the gentleman.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Dr. Manrat Wongkao, just call me Manny. I'm a senior lecturer here at UAL. It's more of a provocation and share what I feel. And because you're very kind and compassionate, and I feel safe to share that with you. And I'm also aware that my name's been recorded, and I'm also employed by UAL.
I'm going to edit this.
And I just want to, raise and share a few things that I noticed. And because I'm not sure if I'm fit into black or brown community. I would see my color as yellow and rainbow. And I look around the room, maybe if anyone have a cultural heritage in East Asia and Southeast Asia, feel free to stand up.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yes.
So I just want to thank you for building this community together, because these are also minorities within minorities.
Yeah.
And thank you for everyone to make this place happening. Because I thought I could raise this, at the provocation towards the end. But I thought I feel safe around you. And also I want maximum impact while everyone's here. Because what I noticed also, Barker made a film yesterday that had the circle of people in white in power, and a person of color can't insert in. When I see people in power this morning hugging one another, I said, I only know Karen, and that is privilege. And I just try to find my way in and carving my door or having my room. And because in education, what I'm experiencing right now, there was academics that say, Manny, do you realize that we have a lot of Southeast Asians in my learning groups? And another academic said, oh, I'm so lucky I don't want your group. So, I just want to raise this about being international students. Some academics comment that these students got money to burn. And I recall my time, my dad was going through liver cancer treatment. Still have to do a freelance job to pay my international fee. So I'm just raise a provocation about, is there anything we don't understand, or how we can communicate or go to underlying issues of academics in all races, and to
go for it. Love that.
Because it's
I'm
not my
glad you
culture
said
to
it.
fight.
You said it out loud.
I'm a Buddhist gay man from Bangkok. It's not my culture to fight. We make peace with ourselves. And when it hurts, sometimes mother said, get on with it. Make sure the community is happy. So that's why I just want to raise one small voice from Southeast Asia.
Not a small, wonderful. Don't know where to go after that provocation. You come in with your
Any more
sword.
questions?
Thank you. Any more questions? Oh, yes. At the front here.
Hello, Osman.
Hi.
And I think this relates to quite a lot of what you've said earlier and to our senior lecturer, to our lecturer. Do you think, had you have had people who represented you or people who are like you in education, you would have got to expand on who you are in your work much earlier and been much more confident in doing it? And that relates to where we are now. Are all our students given the opportunity to say and tell their stories?
I think definitely. I think that the reason why I kind of veered towards kind of fashion. So I think if you come from a particular background and if you're creative, then your parents would probably push you in towards architecture. But I mean, for me, it was like this, that I've actually spoken to a couple of friends who said that somehow is respectable. And for me, it was this idea that, so I told my parents I was doing kind of law and business studies when I came to London, but I managed to get a place at clearing at SOAS to actually, when I started, to do South Asian studies and anthropology. And I dropped out after kind of like a term. But still, so I just was kind of going a bit crazy, and then I eventually met some people, and I got onto this part-time foundation at St. Martin's, and there was this kind of real, and I was working, so it was this real kind of this group of people that actually I was trying to hang out with and trying to find myself, and then I had other issues and saying that I was, it was a kind of different world in a way. And then my parents caught up with me, and then I didn't really want to be gay. And then there was many things, and there was this whole, and then I was like taken back to Birmingham, and then they wanted to get me married, and there was that whole kind of like a world, and I kind of ran. It was just this, but I think fashion was actually the easiest thing for me to actually do. And it was kind of a natural, because I didn't know what art was. I didn't know what art school was, basically. We did like 1 year of art at school. And fashion was this kind of, you dressed up, you had a conversation, it seemed quite performative. It was kind of like a natural extension, and you could have a conversation, basically. And I already knew how to make, growing up in my mom's kind of like Salwar Kameez dressmaking, Indian kind of like, for the community dressmaking business. So it just seemed like a natural kind of extension, and these people were the coolest people that I'd actually seen, and they were much more kind of like, flamboyant, and it just seemed I was naturally kind of attracted to them, and I wanted to be like them. And so I think it's really important that, we have signposts for especially kids who don't really understand what the creative industries can actually give you. Basically, I find the reason why I wrote the book was I had to be really honest with myself, and I feel so honest with myself now that actually it doesn't really matter anymore.
All the things that mattered so much then,
and it feels like I have this kind of like this solid foundation that I can just build upon. And I think those signposts weren't there for me earlier. And I would have probably had, but then I have a richer experience as well. And I have more of a wilder sort of experience, because I've met I come from one space, and I met the Queen, met a few other people, met a few prime ministers kind of thing. And it's this kind of very different, maybe I would have actually still had that trajectory, but and I think for me it's just this interdisciplinary conversation where it's about no borders.
Drive as well, because you didn't have. I felt my personal life, I had so much of a drive to do what I wanted to do eventually, and I went to study business because that was, basically as an Asian student, I was a loser. It was a loser degree. I wasn't doing medicine. I wasn't doing dentistry, so I was a bit of a loser. I did business, okay. But I got out of Bradford by doing that. And then when I got it, and I did my degree, did well. I went to work in the city. I was working at Lloyd's, my first job, I was in the city. And I'd written a letter to Vivienne Westwood when I was a student for my dissertation, a handwritten letter. I always tell students, because no internet, no emails, no nothing. And she let me interview her, and she left a voicemail on the team left a voicemail on my house phone, and I thought, this is the moment. She said, do you want to help with the show? That's where I met Avis. You were at Vivian Westwood with me. And I thought, right, this is the first time in my life, after my degree, I'm 22, I'm actually going to leave my paid job in the city. I'm going to go work for free for 3 months for Vivian Westwood. And it's the first time I had liberation to do my own thing. And from that, I had such a drive to succeed, because I do feel my family looked at me like, oh my God, what the hell has she done now? You know? So yes, that drive helped. And maybe I wouldn't have achieved all that I had if I hadn't had that drive. And you, again, yes, if we had that education and encouragement, maybe that drive wouldn't have come for you either. Maybe you wouldn't have pushed yourself as far as you have.
I think it's just a quest to find where I belong.
Yeah.
I think that's, as I said at the beginning, where I don't think I would probably find that in my life really time.
Well, thank you. I think we're probably we've got 5 minutes. We have 5. We've got a sign that says 5.
Any more questions?
Any more questions?
Thanks so much, Asiya and Osman. And I'm just thinking on behalf of the young creatives here just starting out, what advice or observations you would give them in terms of them feeling free and safe to explore their authenticity, to make their own journey in a way, because right at the beginning of the talk, you very clearly kind of explained the fashion world as relentlessly consuming your resources. And in order for you to survive, you had to keep on this treadmill. And we're sort of given this definition of success as the one way to do things. But you've stepped out of that, and I wonder how you would set the young creatives in the room on their path today, give them the confidence to feel that they don't have to plug into this one definition of success.
I think that the industry is many manifolds, and I think at the pinnacle sits the designer. And I think there's many ways of actually finding quite lucrative careers within the industry. That doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, I'm naturally quite introverted. It's only later in my life I'd really actually push myself out, and a while ago I wouldn't be able to sit and talk on a platform like this, and I've quite naturally, hopefully naturally. So it's this kind of this idea that the label, your name on a kind of like a maison or a house is actually the end, you know. There's kind of I mean, I don't know, it's this kind of idea. I mean, if you don't do what you don't fall. I mean, we were a £3 million business just at wholesale. That makes it about a £9 million business basically across around 120 stores around the world, basically. And then there was still this pressure from institutions like the British Fashion Council, I'm really sorry to say, that what's kind of next and where you need to get your 3 million up to your 5 million and up to your 10 million can business that's actually wholesale. And it was this kind of, and so I had to kind of take on kind of investors, and the easiest kind of investors to actually take upon were rich women. Rich women who, and this is part of the kind of the First Wives Club at the Fashion Trust at the BFC, and I was kind of like pushed down this kind of like road of like, yeah, so and so's like, you know, husband gives them 250 quid, 250,000, not 250 quid, 250,000 to actually play a little bit weird, and then they get bored, and then the tap actually gets turned up. So you have to actually do your. And then you have this system where the shows cost you 60, 70K a season. And it's this kind of like relentless system. And I think I'm so glad that actually, I mean, I think through social media, you've kind of, so much has actually changed in a way.
Yeah, selling direct to consumer.
Yeah, selling direct to consumer, basically. And I think what it does is the old way, the old mom and pop shop way of actually having a retail kind of outlet and having a relationship directly with your consumer.
Yes.
Because you can't really harness any information via a wholesaler either, because they won't give you your information. They may kind of turn up, basically ask you to turn up for an event and just say, yeah, God, we've got the designer kind of turning up, and their best VIP customers will actually turn up and it'll be great. But all the transactions, everything will happen through that retailer. So it's this way of, and I think less is more. I don't think you have to do more. I don't, you know, doing 10 great pieces a year every year is enough, basically. But the problem is actually the industry, and it just becomes like, it's quite a ravenous industry. It just wants more.
It's hungry.
Yeah.
And then also, I think for young people, in your question, is that I think at a young age, try and analyze what the word ego means to you as well. You know, you don't realize what that means till later sometimes. And doing shows and being encouraged to put your money into the shows and encouraged to sell in that model that you've just described that we worked in for a long time, that isn't it. That isn't all it, you know. And expressing yourself directly, exactly as you say, to your consumer is far more expressionful of your own work and less parameters. Go for it. You have an opened up, you know, IG, you have it, it's there, reels, everything. Do it yourself. Don't think about that word ego.
I mean, I think there's many different ways of slicing a pie. But I mean, the industry actually does need to, because press is what it is, press. It means it's exactly what it means. It's like, what's news. That's what press is. And the press industry is actually really about that. So give me the next thing. Give me the next thing. And I think that seasonality of the system of this collection, you know, resort, pre-fall, many things. It's like, God, I've forgotten all of these kind of like, so it's just continuous. And I think those are the cycles that need to be broken on both sides.
Yeah. Okay. We are out of time, we've been told.
Okay.
Osman, thank you. Thank you for bringing your voice, your beauty into the room. Thank you so much for opening and being part of this conversation.
I really need that edited. like, I'm sorry, I have to.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks again, Asiya and Osman, for that wonderful discussion, really rich with so many things to learn about. If you could bear with us for a few minutes, the next section is going to be a presentation from Dr.Lesley-Ann Noel that's been live streamed from America. So Leslie has got up especially early this morning. It's 5 hours behind. So she's assistant professor in the Department of Design at North Carolina State University. So if you just bear with us for a few minutes, we'll get the video link sorted. Thank you very much. Okay, so thanks for your patience, everybody. We are hugely excited to be joined by Dr. Lesley-Ann Noel, who's coming directly from North Carolina. Lesley-Ann is an assistant professor in the Department of Design Studies at North Carolina University. And I got to know Leslie a number of years ago when we both presented at the Design Research Society, one of their conferences. She has a BA in Industrial Design from the Universidade Federal de Panama in Brazil. She has a Master's in Business Administration from the University of the West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago, and earned her PhD in Design from North Carolina State University in 2018. Lesley-Ann practices design through emancipatory, critical and anti-hegemonic lenses, focusing on equity, social justice and the experiences of people who are often excluded from design research. Her research also highlights the work of designers outside of Europe and North America as an act of decolonizing design. She also attempts to promote greater critical awareness among designers, and so for all the aims of what this conference is about, is, an absolutely brilliant guest speaker that we've got here. She's done lots of fab work. Please do look at Leslie's website. She's been introducing critical theory concepts and vocabulary into the design studio. For example, the designer's critical alphabet, which is a series of cards that you can use that prompt lots of complex conversations about design. And her research interests are centred around, as we said, the perspectives of those who would traditionally be excluded from research, community-led research, design-based learning and design thinking. But I just want to very briefly say a couple of the opening lines of Leslie's research statement from her website, and just listen to how Leslie approaches pedagogy and teaching. Leslie says, due to my interest in making design education more relevant to underrepresented audiences, I actively develop my classes, research and projects through an emancipatory and critical lens, seeking to focus on groups of people who may be traditionally excluded from research and design practice. Please give a warm welcome to Lesley-Ann, Noel, and thank you.
Thank you. All right, let me start sharing. And I guess somebody is going to have to kind of send me a little message telling me that I've run out of time. And hold on, let me get it into presenter view. Okay, so I'm ready to start. Thank you, firstly, for this invitation. Tanveer, it's lovely to see you, even if it's just remotely like this. And there's so many things that we could talk about, and I know we will run out of time. So as I said to the organizers, send me a little note saying that your time is up. I want to start off the presentation with a little bit of my backstory. And then get into one project in specific. And, this is a glimpse of my South-centric world. My colleagues from the Design and Oppression Network in Brazil yesterday reminded me to turn the map the right way up. So you can see, I'm from this little dot, Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. And way back in the last century, I left my parents' house and I went to Brazil, different cities in Brazil. I've worked in East Africa as well, all around the Caribbean. And, I'm now in Raleigh, North Carolina, and also spent some time in New Orleans and in California. And all of this is for you to get a little glimpse of my positionality and what has impacted the way that I do my work. As Tanveer alluded to, the paradigm that guides my research philosophy is an emancipatory one. And emancipatory research adopts nothing about us without us stance. And, the people who are affected by the research in this kind of paradigm play a significant role in directing the research and its outcomes instead of merely being studied, right? And as a person from a group that is studied, it is then that I am doing research about people in my world, with people in my world normally, okay? And on the screen, I have two images. One is a lion, because of a West African proverb that I use as a kind of guiding light. Until the lion has his or her own storyteller, the hunter will always have the best part of the story. And then on the other side of the screen, there is an image by Ricardo Levins Morales that has the slogan of the disability movement, which says, "Nothing about us without us is for us." And it's a good reminder that we need to center the people who are impacted by the research that we do. Okay. So my guiding principles have changed over the years, but here are a few words that have guided my personal design and research philosophy. And these are power, agency, access, and emancipation. And to start off, I'm going to talk then about my experience as a Black designer and then the Black experience in design. And then hopefully we'll have a little time for some conversation. Okay. So, you know, my experience as a Black designer is influenced by my lived experiences as a Black person in different contexts. So in Latin America, well, in the Caribbean, obviously, first in Latin America, and in a predominantly white town in Brazil, as a consultant in East Africa, where I was an outsider with a different kind of privilege, as a lecturer in Trinidad, and a lecturer in Stanford, as a student again in North Carolina, in a town that's predominantly white at a predominantly white institution, where I'm now an assistant professor at Tulane University, which is a predominantly white institution within a majority Black city. And also by my experiences as a parent of a Black child, as a daughter, as an insider in some places, as an outsider in some places. And all of this has impacted my experience as a Black designer. My guiding principles, my philosophies, all of this manifests itself in my work. And you can see this in, for example, the positionality wheel, which is a tool that I've created to help students reflect on their identities in the designer's critical alphabet, which also is to nudge students to remember the worlds around them, you know, and that they occupy one world and there are other worlds that people are in and from. The Good Vibes alphabet, which is really more centered on Global South principles, or my imagination of Global South design principles. The Black experience in design, which is about agency and people telling their own stories. And then in also some of the writing that I've been doing. So I just published in Design and Culture an article called Designing New Futures for Design Education, where I'm speculating about different types of design curricula. So that, for example, this image under my superhero body is me speculating about an African-centered design curriculum. And these are the other articles in this special forum that I led with my colleague Renata Marks-Leitão as part of the work that we do in the Pluriversal Design Special Interest Group of the DRS, which we started with Tanveer. Thank you, Tanveer. And, you know, in this work, we've created the pivot conferences, which are meant to encourage design researchers to share, frame, and focus research on Global South epistemologies, ontologies, and methodologies. And our most exciting project is probably the simplest. It is the book club, where we're just saying, you know what, let's read authors from the Global South, from with marginalized identities, and cite these people in the work that we're doing, right? But I'm not only bringing these guiding principles into writing, I'm also actually bringing it into funded research and engagement projects, like the work that I'm doing in patient-centered outcomes research, and the work that I'm doing in STEM education engagement. So I'm going to start off telling you about a project that I started working on at Tulane before the Black experience in design, which informs the Black experience in design, right? So at Tulane, we had this project called the Hello from the Pluriverse project, where students of mine interviewed designers from all around the world outside of what is typically seen as mainstream in design. Now, this was me as a Black professor going into this predominantly white institution. During my 2 years at Tulane, I never taught a Black student. I think I taught 2 brown students, right? And I had to think, how was I going to get students to see that design wasn't only white. And so I really reached out in my network and I asked people if they would be open to being interviewed. And then the students, they interviewed people from all around the world, from Brazil, from Trinidad, where I'm from. They interviewed Black people in the United States. And then what we did is we recorded these interviews. We collected oral histories. We wrote essays from the interviews, and then we created the podcast. And this was an extension of our work in the Pluriversal Design Special Interest Group. And it definitely influenced the way that I worked as an editor in the Black experience of design, because we were in the podcast trying to figure out how could we get people to tell their own stories about design. And so now I'll get into the Black experience in design, and I'll give you a little bit more of that backstory of the book, and then I'll give you a tour of the book. And then in the room, someone will tell me when we really have to stop the conversation, because if you let me, I will talk for 3 hours, right? So I'm one of 6 editors of a whopping 595-page book about the Black experience in design. And the managing editor was actually Anne Berry. So sometimes you'll hear me say, well, this was actually Anne Berry's project, and I was just a little add-on at the end of it, right? Jennifer Rittner is the development editor. Kelly Walters is the creative director. And then the other editors were Kareem Colley, Penina Achayo-Laker, and me, Lesley-Ann Noel. The book design was done by Renald Lusant. All right. And so what was going on? This was summer 2020. And spring and summer 2020, that's when summer 2020 is when this idea was born, right? We were a few months into the COVID-19 pandemic, and we were mourning the deaths of Ahmed Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd at the hands of police. And the subsequent Black Lives Matter protests led the way to larger national conversations, national in the sense of the United States, and international conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what it means to be Black in America. So I received a phone call. I don't actually remember who the call was from. I think it might have been from Anne. And I was invited to join this team of editors. I knew Kareem Colley, and Kareem actually told me, yes, he recommended me to join this project. We didn't know what we wanted to do. We thought about doing a special issue, and then about Black design. And then we said, but that's actually not going to be enough, because a special issue will only be like 6 to 8 papers. And eventually we started to imagine the book that we might have wanted. And each editor had their own agenda, so like Anne and Kelly were very clear about they wanted the book that they wanted to have as Black graphic designers. I'm more into like maybe anthropology and community engagement. So I didn't want like a textbook like that. I wanted something about stories, people telling their stories. I had already been doing this emancipatory kind of work, so I was really interested in the storytelling and not telling other people's stories, right? And how did we do it? So, it was a huge ethnographic or auto-ethnographic project where we invited 65 to 70 Black designers to tell their own stories. We brainstormed about themes, contributors, how we thought people would write and talk. We reached out to people and invited them, and we wanted to see if they were interested. So a lot of people don't write, and so we had to figure out how could we get these people. I think in all we have maybe about 60 to 65 essays. How could we get 65 people to write? And so we had to create all of these mechanisms, you know, because people carry around stories that they can't write. And so, you know, we did things in different ways. We sent prompts to people. We suggested that people write letters. We asked people to maybe like reflect on their journals. We created little writing sessions on Saturday mornings and Sunday mornings where people could pop in and just write with us silently. Again, responding to one of the prompts. They could write to a future self or a past self. We also did interviews with people where we downloaded the transcripts for the interviews, and then we turned those interviews into essays. So we created many, many ways of being involved in this production. And when we were done, this was supposed to be like a 300-page, 200 to 300-page book. When we were done, we had 595 pages, and some of that still ended up on the cutting room floor. So what you have is what we absolutely could not give up.
Leslie, we've got about 10 minutes left.
10 minutes.
Yes.
So let me see. What should I show you in 10 minutes? Would people, I can talk for 2 more minutes, and then I don't know if people have questions. Right? So how is this book aligned with my principles? It was about emancipatory oral histories, you know, for us, by us, redefining academic research. We created multiple forms of participation, as I said. We had people telling their own stories. We got many points of view, stories of agency, liberation, and not just exclusion and oppression. We also wanted to create some equity, so we ran a huge Kickstarter campaign to be able to offer payment to all of the people who participated in the book, right? And let me see. We have like 8 chapters. I'm going to jump to my favorite chapter, which is the last chapter. Well, first I'm going to show you, we had, let's see, we had one person, this is one of the forms of participation. One of our contributors created these posters, you know, and unfortunately they're not in color in the book, right? And then my favorite chapter is chapter 8, which is about radical and liberatory spaces. And so we had people like Adrienne Marie Brown, Maleni Barnett, Terence Moline, people who had created their own spaces in design. And so I'll close, I suppose, my part here with this quote by Adrienne Marie Brown, who gave us some tips or advice as Black designers. So the first advice she says is, I would have Black designers listen for the design that is original design within you, the design that predates trauma, the design that predates socialization, the design that predates the shaping of Blackness as something lacking or something absent or something less than or something plagued by suffering, struggling, and pain. And if you can lean into the concept as design as the sacred work of creating the world in which we share space, share lives, and share the miracle, to me, that's the impetus of Black design. And then her last thing was that she would add for Black designers to really think outrageously in terms of the scale of their visions, and to see Black designers she wants to see Black designers looking at entire cityscapes, looking at entire community gardening efforts, and really thinking huger, bigger than the way that maybe we think we can. So she says, I want Black designers to not just think about a building or an object, not just to think about an interior, practice, 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 have a really massive vision, because I do think this is our time. And so I think that her work was pretty inspiring for everyone in this book, you know, as she gave us this kind of guiding light for everyone. And I know that we only have like a few more minutes. I don't know if anyone wants to ask any burning questions about the process of this book, but, you know, we started off with this idea that it would have been just a journal with 6 to 8 articles, and we collected maybe about 60 essays, just leaning into our positionalities and the positionalities of other people around us and our stories. And so maybe that could be a little bit of an inspiration to some of the people in this room who might be listening. So, Tanveer, maybe someone has a question.
The round of applause.
Yes,
Thank
okay,
you.
good.
Thanks, Lesley-Ann. I mean, unfortunately, we haven't got the camera that's facing the audience, but we've got a big room here full of lots of people, I think, who've got lots of questions. So maybe if we've got a roving microphone, and also maybe they can come up to the front. So would anybody like to ask Lesley-Ann a question first? While we're just going to wait for questions, I just wanted to ask you one about the how you might define the emancipatory space. Like, could you describe it to us in education, what it looks like, what it feels like, and where you think, because there's lots of educators in this room, where educators should be going?
Yeah, so the thing about emancipation is that there are different ways of describing it, and even I just have described it differently over the years, right? So first, I used to think it was more about just focusing on people who were typically excluded, and now I know it's more than that. It's about having the agenda being driven by these people, rather than us imposing an agenda on other people, right? So, it means that, like, in class, my students drive my agenda, right? I teach a class on contemporary issues. The current class will normally establish the contemporary issues that are important to the future class, right? So it's about, teaching in that way so that you're always getting feedback from the people who are affected. So if we're teaching, we have to listen to the students, and the students have to drive the work. We have to figure out what is it that the students need to be hearing or doing. And it might not be about giving up all the control, but definitely emancipatory approaches require you to give up some of the control that traditionally you might have had.
No, I think that's really useful. The idea of things being student-led, I think, is something that we probably don't hear enough about in education. So it's kind of quite difficult for a lot of educators to think about that, but obviously incredibly important. I also wanted to ask you a bit about our disciplines and how you have crossed over and through and above and around different disciplines in your own research, because this is a fashion design audience here today, although we are in an art college which has lots of different design disciplines, products, ceramics and so forth. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on future agendas in art and design education, and where our paths might meet and connect, rather than just keep being bounded.
So I am originally an industrial designer, and I no longer can read. I mean, I still say I'm an industrial designer, but I don't know if industrial designers say that I am, right? And I think, to me, the future of the discipline of design in general is learning to have these cross-disciplinary conversations, right? Which might make life more difficult for some people and easier for others. So, because I'm having cross-disciplinary conversations, it does mean that I can work in education, in public health, in I also do some work with cities, in civic innovation, because I've learned to use a kind of language in design that's really accessible. So I'm not just speaking design jargon stuff, right? And every now and again, I'll re-enter a room with designers, and I can hear that nobody would understand, nobody outside of the room would understand what we're talking about, right? And so, you know, like, I do think that, yes, to make ourselves, I hate to use a word like relevant, but to make ourselves relevant, yes, we have to figure out how we're dropping the jargon. How are we going to have more conversations with other people? You know, I would recommend to people in the room, you know, if you do have options to do other courses, if you're students, I don't actually know the population of the room, you know, do see how you can have kind of expand your conversations a little bit. Like, my interest in critical theory came because I felt that in my design education, I really did not get critical enough. You know, all I really learned at the end was how to make a form beautiful and whether to pick blue or green, right? Which, okay, I'm oversimplifying my education, but
in our context, it's the shape of the collar.
Right, yes.
The length of the hem, yeah.
Yes. And, you know, there's a point when you realize these things don't matter, but you can use your design abilities to help work on things that do matter, right? So I'm very excited to be working about youth violence with a city and using the skills that I have in choosing blue or green, you know, to push this agenda forward, you know. So I don't know how people will do it, but we do have to come out of our little design schools and design colleges and have deeper conversations, right? You know, I will highlight, of course, there are a lot of people who are doing really interesting work cross-disciplinarily. I'll highlight the work of the Design and Oppression Network in Brazil, where they're having really deep conversations about design and oppression, right? And, you know, because they're having these conversations, it probably means that the people who are doing design are going to do it in different ways because they can see the oppression around them. And so I think it's these kinds of things that we have to think about as we do our work as designers.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lesley-Ann, for joining us today, getting up early. You know, what time is it with you now?
It's okay now. It's 8:10, but I did get up pretty early. But now I
hope you go and have a big bowl of cereal. Can we have a big round of applause again? Thank you.
Thank you, and have a great day, everyone.